It's my pleasure to introduce Lori Garducki, who has been an amazing champion on the issue of juvenile justice reform on behalf of kids and an advocate for them. Improving outcomes for youth cuts to the heart of what this organization is about, what their work has been, and also about the heart of what we're doing here today in this fine day in Austin. And so with that, I'm hoping you'll help me welcome Lori Garducki.
Good morning. It's great to see so many dear friends and colleagues that we've been working with over the years, and pleased to welcome you to the CSG State Forum on Juvenile Justice. But first, let me do a particular shout out to CSG for its work in planning such an incredibly ambitious program, for getting all of you here, which was, I know, a challenge, in deciding who are the leaders in your respective states to represent what you're doing and to hear about the work that lies ahead for all of you. But we appreciate CSG not only for planning this program and getting all of you here, but the work it does throughout the year. And I also want to give special recognition to Mike Thompson and Josh Weber and their colleagues at the Justice Center in bringing you all today. I also want to mention Mike Lawler, who is the chair of the board of directors for the CSG Justice Center. Mike had a previous role as a legislator, and then subsequently has been working with Governor Malloy on both juvenile as well as criminal justice reform. And he had very exciting news that I'm sure he will share with you when he makes his remarks about how Governor Malloy and the state of Connecticut continue to push the envelope in terms of doing what's best for young people in conflict with the law. He's also joined here today by Tony Walker, the legislature that has supported many of those ambitious reforms. So it was my charge to give you a sense of what got all of us in this room here today. And I think that if we had tried to hold a meeting like this 20 years ago, we wouldn't have gotten nearly the number of people, and certainly not the diversity of states, the different stakeholders that we see in this room today. It would have probably been a handful of some of us who have been thinking about these issues and wondering what we could do to reverse the tide, if you will, of the wave of juvenile justice reform that was coming across the country, which resulted in more kids being tried as adults, the kids that remained in the juvenile justice system subject to more harsh and punitive sanctions, and that the juvenile justice system itself had lost the notion of rehabilitative ideals. But today we're here to mark a milestone in terms of what has occurred over the last 20 years, where incarceration is down to historic lows, public safety has in fact improved, and many more kids are staying in their communities and getting the programs and services they need, and well on their track to becoming productive and successful adults. Now, MacArthur has been proud to support many of those efforts and many of the people in this room who are engaged in those activities. But the fact that there is momentum now and the tide has turned suggests, as I've said, it wasn't always the case. Now, there have been previous waves of reform. There was the initial creation of the juvenile court in Cook County, Illinois, in fact. There were the due process protections that came about because of Galt. And then there were the more harsh and punitive sanctions that the wave of reform that we are all still recovering from. But now there are new forces in play, a developmental approach to juvenile justice reform. So in talking about this milestone and the progress that has been made, I also want to share with you my concerns about how to sustain and secure that progress and capitalize on the work that's been done today. I do believe this wave of reform is different. I believe it's different because it's not as fragmented or piecemeal. It's not limited to just a handful of states. It's not just because of one or two charismatic leaders, but because there's been a united front. It's very much grounded in knowledge of best practices and scientific research that says what works, how kids are different from adults, and what the implications of that are. It's been field tested, demonstrated to work in terms of reform initiatives that are practical and feasible. And more importantly, we now have the tools and resources to guide other state and local jurisdictions who want to go down the same paths. So what we have today is more than a proof of concept. We actually have a wave of reform. And it was this wave that we'd like to see continue to build and sweep across the country. Now, I think in understanding how to continue building this wave and have more state and local jurisdictions engaged in this work, that we have to remember how we got here. So what MacArthur did as it looked at the field in 1996 is that it recognized that the kinds of reforms that were being put in place did not reflect what we know about how adolescents are not yet adults. Now, while there was a substantial body of research that indicated that that was the case, that research had not yet been translated into what the implications are for law and policy. So MacArthur funded the Research Network on Adolescent Development and Juvenile Justice to examine those implications, and found, in fact, that because of their behavioral and brain development, that they are more impulsive, they're unable to see the consequences of their actions, future actions, they're impetuous and impulsive, and they are sensation-seeking and take risks. And that is a recipe for getting into trouble and making some mistakes. The question is, how do we hold them accountable for their mistakes, prevent them from reoffending, protect public safety, treat them fairly, and ensure that they become successful adults? So what we did then then did in thinking about our work going forward was, what could we do to reverse the trend? So we created what we called Models for Change. And by that, we knew that it would be important to demonstrate that regardless of a state's starting point, that it could get on the pathway to having a developmentally appropriate juvenile justice system that would hold young people accountable, prevent their reoffending, treat them fairly, and more importantly, save the taxpayer dollar. Now, what we hope to achieve by this, we knew we couldn't work in just any single state. We had to work in multiple states. And more importantly, that reform initiative had to be grounded in a set of principles. But how those reforms would be enacted, how they would play out, had to be very much determined by the stakeholders in that particular state. So what we did was focus on a set of principles about how kids are different, how you need to treat them fairly, how they had the capacity for change, that they had to take personal responsibility, but so did the adults in their lives. So we selected 4 states that had very different starting points: Pennsylvania in 2003, Illinois in 2004, Louisiana in 2005, and Washington State in 2006, and said, we'll work with you. We don't have a blueprint. We don't have a particular way of instituting reform in the United States. It's up to you to decide what your priorities are, and we'll give you the support, technical assistance, and the time you need to make those changes. What was important to us was local leadership, collaboration, using data to drive decision-making, rely on evidence-based practices, and to have the capacity to respond and adapt to change. Now, in addition to the states, in each of the states, then what we had was a local partner. We wrapped around the national experts. They decided what the levers of systems change are. They adopted the particular strategies, and they decided who their partners in the states were. Now, we weren't in a position to work in all of the states that were interested in juvenile justice reform. So what we did then was create action networks. And the idea behind action networks was to focus on what we saw as 3 critical issues for juvenile justice reform: racial disparities, mental health, and a strong indigent defense system. Now, the aim in this model is, while we were asking states to work on a single issue, and we gave them short-term support and enabled them to come up with strategic innovations and create a peer learning community, we felt that we would come up with innovations and policies and practices that were ripe for rapid diffusion across the country. Now, as we began to accumulate a body of knowledge and information, tools and resources, and more importantly, emissaries of reform, the leaders in the states at both the state and the local level who had done reform, we decided to push that out. We had some ideas about what would work. We developed tools and kits and resources that you'll be hearing about. And we decided to partner with the feds. And that was because they have the capacity to push these ideas out farther and faster than what a private foundation could do. So we had partnerships with both the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention as well as SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration. And so what they were able to do then, by selecting states through a competitive application process, of having them go through some of the same toolkits, manuals, and so on, we got a sense for the generalizability of what we were doing, and we could also continue to refine and work on our tools and resources. So now, with the work that we've been doing between OJ, JDP, and SAMHSA, our own work with our initial 12 states, we also launched an effort to even move juvenile justice reform even faster. So then we worked with the national campaign to reform state juvenile justice systems. And we've seen remarkable changes in the legislature from the top down, not just the bottom up, but the top down, to move these changes even further. I'm sorry about there are probably only 5 states we haven't been to. But I'm encouraged that we're getting there in terms of covering all these states. And what we've seen are everything from raise the age legislation, closing large institutions and keeping the resources to serve kids in the community, changes in status offense laws, reduction of shackling through both court rules and laws, rolling back automatic transfer, and increased due process protections for kids. All of this, the incarceration rate continues to decline, as well as there's no, public safety has in fact been improved. It also helped that along the way, okay. Can someone help me by advancing the slide for me? Since it doesn't seem to be advancing. What do you guys have, the something? There you go, thank you. There have been a number of advances. No, that's off. There have been a number of advances at the Supreme Court. So you will recall that we talked about the research network sort of setting the groundwork for changes in juvenile justice reform. So we, in effect, now have a new constitutional framework for saying how kids are different from adults and the courts and corrections on our laws need to treat them accordingly. So we've seen the juvenile death penalty eliminated, and we've seen continued progress in rolling back juvenile life without parole. Now, what we see is the whole discussion and debate around juvenile justice reform has changed. The frame, the lens, the language in which we talk about these kids and the outcomes that we expect. We know now that from other sources, not just what I'm saying here today, is that there have been progress in juvenile justice reform. There's what we call the 4th wave of juvenile justice reform in a developmental approach. We've also seen changes in the state legislature, some of which MacArthur has been behind, but others that other groups have done with the support and resources of the advocates in the states and other private funders. We've also seen the Supreme Court, as I said, come up with a new constitutional framework for thinking about how to treat kids in the system differently. What MacArthur then has done is to create a platform that we think will be important in securing and sustaining the progress in juvenile justice system reform. So what we've done is create 4 resource centers that focus on indigent defense, dual status youth and probation, racial and ethnic, the mental health needs of kids, and status offenses. And so our partnerships with VERA, the RFK Children's Action Corps, NJDC, and the Collaborative for Change. But more importantly, we've also enlisted other groups besides CSG in something we call the Resource Center Partnership. So I am optimistic that with this platform in place and the scaffolding, the tools and resources we've talked about, that we can sustain this reform. Now, MacArthur has invested about $160 million over 20 years in juvenile justice. I think we're smarter, experienced. We have the resources to continue this work. But frankly, progress depends on all of you in this room. MacArthur writes checks. We make grants. What we depend on for this effort to be successful is your dedication, passion, and commitment. But because of all of the people in this room, I am confident that this progress that we have seen will continue. So I applaud you and the efforts and the work that you do every day to secure a better and brighter future for some of the most vulnerable kids in our society. So thank you very much. Now, before I give up the podium, I have the great honor and distinction to introduce my friend and colleague, Robert Listenby, the administrator of the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. Bob has had a very distinguished career before joining OJJDP as a public defender in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania in the city of Philadelphia. He's been a zealous advocate for young people for decades. And I'm very proud to say he is also the winner of, received the award of the Models for Change Champion in 2011. So, Bob.
Good morning, everybody. It's my great honor to welcome you to this 50-state forum and to very, very briefly tell you a little bit about some of the things that are going to be going on. First, I would like to thank the Honorable Sharon Keller, presiding judge of the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, and Chief Justice Nathan Heck of the Texas Supreme Court, and of course, Senator John Whitmire, for spearheading criminal and juvenile justice reform and having a very impactful effect here in the state of Texas. And the lessons that we've learned from Texas, we've applied both at the federal government level and in states throughout the nation. I would also at this time like to acknowledge my colleagues from the Department of Justice who are here, because I would like you to talk to them during the course of the 2 days that we are here. First of all, we have Mr. Theron Pride, who is Chief of Staff for Assistant Attorney General Carol Mason, who is the leader of the Office of Justice Programs. And I just ask him to stand, please, also. They know who they are. Ms. Cheryl Jones, Deputy Administrator of the for Programs for the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, back in the back. Cheryl, shout out. She's responsible for most of the grants that OJJDP provides to states and to nonprofits. Ms. Kelly Blue, Associate Administrator for the Juvenile Justice Systems Improvement Division. Kelly's job is to translate new ideas, new policies and practices into federal government grants. Also, I'd like to acknowledge Ms. Gwen Dilworth, Program Specialist, whose job it is to take those grants and supervise them as they go forward. She's back over here on my left. And finally, Ms. Cindy Pappas, who's a Senior Policy Advisor. Ms. Pappas, back over here on my right, is leading the policy work on our Smarter Juvenile Justice Initiative, Youth and Law Enforcement Initiatives, and worked on our girls policy, which was just released about 2 weeks ago. Texas has truly advanced the field of juvenile justice through groundbreaking studies. It was referenced earlier, Breaking School Rules, and also Closer to Home. When the Attorney General, Eric Holder, and Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, heard the reports on Breaking School Rules that were presented to the Coordinating Council of Juvenile Justice, they were so impressed with the data that was presented and with the lessons that have been learned that they immediately began the process of developing the Supportive School Discipline Initiative, which is focused on the issue of the school-to-prison pipeline. That initiative has had enormous impact across the nation, but they followed it because the data was there coming from Texas, providing a clear idea about how we could use the data and understand the problem better. So again, a shout out to Texas for the wonderful work done there. In addition, Closer to Home was just presented to Attorney General Loretta Lynch at our last Coordinating Council meeting, and she was duly impressed by the data there. We're still trying to figure out exactly how we at the federal level take that knowledge and apply it across the nation, but I do want to thank those of you here in Texas for conducting that research, and we're very happy to use it at the national level for guideposts as we go forward. I'd also like to recognize Lori Garducki and the MacArthur Foundation for making this forum possible and for their unwavering leadership and commitment to juvenile justice reform for the past decade. As Lori mentioned, I work with MacArthur's initiative in the state of Pennsylvania. And I'd like to acknowledge also my colleagues from the state of Pennsylvania, where I learned much of what I know about reforming juvenile justice, and certainly both the good and the bad, because we did also have our problems in Luzerne County. Other foundations, including the Pew Charitable Trust, the Annie E. Casey Foundation, the Public Welfare Foundation have been equally committed partners. Their diligence has helped the field understand the need to improve outcomes for youth through meaningful reform of the juvenile justice system. It's not often that stakeholders from all 50 states and territories, including the District of Columbia, convene to talk about juvenile justice reform. This is really a remarkable logistical feat. I'd like to thank the forum organizers, the incredible leadership and staff of the Justice Center of the Council of State Governments, and especially Mike Thompson and Josh Weber for their leadership in bringing us all together. I'd like you to simply acknowledge them with a round of applause, if you would. I also want to thank you for being here today. You represent key voices and perspectives from every part of the country, bringing a wealth of knowledge and experience that will be invaluable to all of us as we go forward. It's nearly impossible to acknowledge all individual contributors to juvenile justice reform effort, but I'd like to say to each and every one of you, thank you for your unwavering support of juvenile justice reform. We all know that the bulk of reform work is being done at the state and local levels. I've had the good fortune to travel to several of your states and talk to you and talk to your kids in your institutions, and I really am impressed with the advanced work that you're doing, with the kind of commitment and compassion that you have for bringing about reform with our kids. The Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention is an ardent supporter of your efforts. Our office's three priorities are, first of all, upholding the core protections outlined in the Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Act, reducing out-of-home placement, and comprehensive, data-driven, statewide reform. I'd like to look for just a moment at a few successes we've seen in the juvenile justice arena over the past 15 years. As Lori noted, the successes we've seen are truly remarkable. First, the number of youth in out-of-home placement has declined significantly. Since 1999, the number of youth in residential placement has been cut in half, down from about 109,000 to a little more than 54,000 in 2013. Second, we've seen a number of states, such as Georgia, Kentucky, and Hawaii in 2013, and West Virginia and South Dakota in 2015, enact legislation to reduce the use of out-of-home placement and increase access to community-based options, particularly for youth committing low-level offenses. These changes are projected to lead to enormous cost savings, $24 million over 5 years in Kentucky, and $11 million over the next 5 years in Hawaii. Most importantly, reducing the number of youth in residential placement puts them on a path to well-being by providing the services they need for positive youth development and later contributions to our society. However, despite these successes we've all achieved, there is still much work to be done, particularly in keeping youth out of the juvenile justice system, and especially in improving outcomes for youth who do become system involved. It is not uncommon for youth to be rearrested soon after returning to their communities after a period of confinement. The rate can be as high as 80% within 3 years of release. And arrest rates for youth under community supervision are often not much better. Given these stark numbers, we know it's not enough to reduce incarceration rates alone. We must also find concrete ways to support youth so that they are well equipped to return to school and achieve both academic and workforce successes. The administration and the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention are taking concrete steps to help foster meaningful, lasting reform in all 50 states, the territories, and the District of Columbia. Just last month, President Obama declared October 2015 National Youth Justice Awareness Month. The proclamation demonstrates the President's commitment to keeping kids out of the juvenile justice system and giving them the tools they need to reach their full potential, and comes on the heels of the administration's extensive efforts to enhance the lives of America's youth through a number of key initiatives. We are committed to supporting progressive efforts that better serve our nation's youth, keeping them out of the juvenile justice system altogether. We are also committed to states and helping them develop and implement plans for comprehensive statewide reform. I'll get into more detail about the kinds of support we can offer to states in the session I'll be leading this afternoon. I hope you can all join me for that session. This forum is an unprecedented opportunity for state leaders from each branch of the government to work together to build on their accomplishments and ensure that every state has a statewide plan to reduce recidivism and improve outcomes for youth in the juvenile justice system. I know that all 50 states represented here are up to the challenge. In closing, I'd like to share with you some words from Robert F. Kennedy, about the power that each of us has to effect meaningful change. The late senator was speaking to the National Union of South African Students at the University of Cape Town, South Africa in 1966. But his words, I'm going to paraphrase them, still resonate powerfully today, especially for us gathered here. And I quote, "Some believe there is nothing one man or one woman can do against the enormous array of the world's ills. Yet many of the world's greatest movements have flowed from the work of a single individual. Few will have the greatness to bend history itself, but each of us can work to change a small portion of events, and in the total of all those acts will be written the history of this generation." So thank you very much for allowing me to speak to you this morning. I look forward to a lot of discussions as I go forward. At this time, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Mike Lauer, but I'd like to say one thing about Mike that is worth noting. Mike, in addition to being chair of the board of the Council of State Governments, was very instrumental in his work in Connecticut and working with the governor on the release of a new policy, a policy that incorporates the science that comes from adolescent development and all the work that's been done by the MacArthur Foundation over the last decade, so that we look at raising the age of children who are in our juvenile justice system so that we can have our systems address the needs that they have in the older ranges, first up to the age 21, and a special set of programs for children who are 21 to 25. I'll leave it to Mike to explain the details, but I got to tell you, one of the biggest challenges that all of us are going to face over the next decade and for years to come after that is what we're going to do with the science that we have. What are we going to do when we look at the science that tells us that children's brains are not fully mature until they're 25? What are we going to do with the fact when we recognize that so many of our kids who show up in our criminal justice system need the kind of services that we have in our juvenile justice system? We're going to have to face it at some point in time in the future. I'd like to leave it to Mike and others to explain what they're doing in Connecticut. But I got to tell you, from the federal government's point of view, we're all going to have to address these issues as we go forward. Thank you. It's an honor and pleasure to be here. I look forward to talking to you, as Senator Whitmire said, to each and every one of you, if I can, over the next 2 days. But the senator's better than I am. I don't know if I'm going to be able to accomplish that. But in the days to come, until the day that my term expires at the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, I look forward to meeting and talking to as many of you as I possibly can. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Lawler. I'm from Connecticut. I work for Governor Dan Malloy. I'm his criminal justice policy guy, and it's an honor for me to be here to speak with all of you. But the reason I'm here is I also chair the board for the the Council State Government's Justice Center, and it's my job in a moment to tell you a little bit about our center and what our goals are here at this meeting. But first, and for those of you who have been around juvenile justice policymaking for a long time, you recognize the names of the people who are helping us make this event possible today, because the same foundations have been there time and time again. The Justice Department has been there time and time again to help us identify best practices and implement them in our states. Lori Garducki and the MacArthur Foundation have been at the forefront of making this a reality, not just in the area of juvenile justice, but broadly in criminal justice policy. I mean, my state is the beneficiary of another grant. They've got the Justice and Safety Challenge Grant to reduce jail populations, especially a disproportionate minority confinement in jails. And it's without this kind of support, without this kind of encouragement, without this kind of validation, we would not be able to pursue the kinds of policies that have proven successful in my state, and I'm sure in your state as well. But together with MacArthur, Annie Casey, the Pew Charitable Trust, the Public Welfare Foundation, they're helping us put this together here today and tomorrow, and they've always been there for us. And I think if you haven't worked with these organizations before, you should know that if you make the ask and you're prepared to follow through on the expectations they have for results, you will get their support. And let this be an opportunity for you to get to know these foundations and take advantage of the resources that they bring to the table. You just heard Bob Listenby from OJJDP. He's the latest in a series of leaders of that agency who have helped work with state and local governments around the country to achieve the extraordinary results we're all seeing today in every one of our jurisdictions. And this has spanned 3 administrations. Our work with the Clinton administration, and then the Bush administration, and now with the Obama administration, has defied all partisan labels and has produced extraordinary results. And I think it's a credit to people like Bob Listenby, who can come into these positions where it's easy to get sidetracked in sort of partisan scuffles, et cetera, and make it possible for us at the local level to do what we know will work best regardless of party affiliation or ideological bent. And I just want to say thank you, Bob, for helping that come to pass. And finally, here in Texas, and we have extraordinary hosts. You know, I'm an avowed liberal Democrat from Connecticut, and it's a pleasure for me to be here in Texas, which is among the reddest of the red states. And the best part for me and for my boss, Governor Malloy, and my colleagues in the legislature, et cetera, is to be able to say, this works in Texas, right? These are ideas which have worked in all kinds of states. And when it comes to juvenile justice reform, when it comes to measuring data, Texas is the model that all of us seek to emulate. And I'm pretty sure that 20 years ago, I never thought I'd be saying those words in a public forum of being from Connecticut. But Judge Keller, who's a member of our board, Chief Justice Hecht, and Senator John Whitmire, I mean, they are inspirations to all of us around the country. And, you know, I was inspired by Senator Whitmire's success. You know, when I was in the legislature for 24 years before I took this job with Governor Malloy. So I was in his role of having to figure out how to talk my colleagues into doing all this stuff. And so I decided I'll shave my head, I'll get some dark glasses like this, and it'll work. So, and it's all been fine since then. So there's 50 states represented here. There's 4 people from every state. And those teams, and we've looked at the teams, I mean, you are the leaders in each of your states. My state, Connecticut, we have the head of our Department of Children and Families, Joette Katz, who's a former justice of our Supreme Court. We've got Judge Bernadette Conway, who is the chief juvenile judge for our state. We've got Representative Tony Walker, who chairs the Appropriation Committee in our legislature and has been at the forefront of juvenile justice reform going back since the day she arrived in the legislature. So our team, like your team, is in a position to deliver on the best practices which we'll all be learning about here today. And I think it's pretty fair to say, I've been to a lot of conferences of this general type, but I've never been to one where we had these many key decision makers from every single jurisdiction in the country, and that is very significant. So my job really this morning is to speak a little bit about what is this entity called the CSG Justice Center. What the heck is this? What are we trying to sell? What are we trying to accomplish here? Well, the Council of State Governments is what it sounds like it is. It's just the collaboration of executive, judicial, and legislative branches of government from all the states to try and identify what will work. And the Justice Center in particular is the criminal justice arm of CSG. You may not be aware of this, but it has grown by leaps and bounds over the last 20 years. And there's a reason we have 100 staff and a $25 million budget, because over the last 20 years, we have managed to win the confidence of every frontline player in the criminal justice system, meaning judges and prosecutors and legislators and sheriffs and prosecutors and public defenders and mental health professionals at the federal, state, and local level, victim advocates, juvenile justice advocates. You know, our philosophy has always been, if we bring everybody together who is a frontline expert on criminal justice policy and on criminal justice system delivery, that we will find that at least 80% of the time there will be consensus on what there is to be done. In other words, there's not a lot of disagreement among the people like yourselves who actually know how the system really works when it comes to what would make our job easier, how could we get better results. And so to facilitate that consensus, the Council of State Governments has tried to convene events like this where we can collaborate across jurisdictional boundaries, across partisan lines, to figure out how we can do a better job in our jurisdictions. You know, one way of putting it, we kind of have like a Noah's Ark of criminal justice professionals. We've got 2 of every type. We've got sort of a Democrat and Republican or liberal or conservative or tough on crime, soft on crime from every conceivable jurisdiction. So as a liberal former legislator from Connecticut, and I can bring in a conservative legislator from another state to validate the consensus around these policies. And we do the same thing with prosecutors, as I said, on down the road. So this is the secret to our success, I think. You'll get to judge for yourself. On our board, we have key players from around the country. On this juvenile justice issue, two people in particular, Tom Stickrath, who ran the Juvenile Justice Agency in Ohio, and Senator Dick Sears from Vermont, who's been a leader on this for many, many years, have advanced this issue for at least the last 10 years within the Council State Government's Justice Center. And there are many of our 15 board members here at the meeting. Maybe if you don't mind, just stand up for a second so you can see who to reach out to if you have questions about the CSG process. So would our board members please stand up? And you've heard mention of two landmark research projects, publications that the Justice Center has done. The Breaking Schools Rules publication from a few years ago shed the spotlight on what happens here in Texas, because Texas, unlike most of our states, has an extraordinary depth of data available to measure outcomes. And what they were able to find, and you can read the report for yourself, is that same kinds of schools, very different outcomes in terms of suspensions and expulsions. We also have the report on, well, let me just skip over a couple of things because, as usual, they've asked me to cover a lot of stuff and go into too much detail here. But the outcomes that we're hoping to accomplish here. First of all, we know that many states have, every one of your states has achieved great results in the last few years in juvenile justice reform. But we are looking to take advantage of those outcomes and do even more, do even better. And so we have three criteria that we're hoping to accomplish here. Number one, establish a plan to reduce recidivism even further, to identify what works and align our processes to achieve those goals, and most importantly, to demonstrate in each of our states support from all three branches of government: governor, legislative leaders, and judicial branch leaders. Working together with MacArthur and OJJDP, we've convened this forum for that purpose, right? And during the course of this forum, we're going to find out the answers to those questions. What does work? How can we collaborate? Most importantly, we want to figure out how should states collect and analyze the data that tells us how far we've come and how far we need to go. And I think a lot of our states really don't do a completely comprehensive job of accomplishing those goals. Over the next 8 weeks, our hope is that each of your teams will be able to develop a plan to accomplish these goals. And I think what you will find out from the staff of the Justice Center, that our staff will reach out to you to find out, have you done this, have you established this plan, and work with you to achieve those goals. Our focus is to identify just the juveniles who are already in contact with the justice system. You know, often we get off into other areas where we can save all the world's problems, you know, fix the schools, more jobs, et cetera. Those are important. But our focus here is the children who are already in contact with the juvenile justice system and how we can improve outcomes for them. We're going to focus on recidivism, as I said, and I think we all acknowledge that recidivism is a very narrow definition, but really we're talking more about broadly wellness. So what are the outcomes for these kids? Not just did they get arrested again, but did they succeed in life? And there's ways to measure that, and we're hoping to focus on that. Race. Obviously, the racial disparities in the juvenile system are an extraordinary problem that we all have to acknowledge and talk about and focus on achieving results there. And all of us are state teams. In almost every state, our local colleagues have to find that they are going to work in tandem with the state government leaders. And so we're going to focus on how we reach out to the local and county level officials. And you know, we acknowledge at the beginning, every state is unique. So like, for example, in my state, Connecticut, we have no counties. We have no county government. We have no elected prosecutors. We have no elected judges. It's a different kind of state. it's unique in that way. Your states are unique. There's no one-size-fits-all solution to these problems. So those are the charges, those are the expectations we have at the Justice Center. I can promise you one thing, that the young people that work for the Council of State Governments Justice Center are the best and the brightest in the nation. They work 80, 100-hour weeks to solve problems that we identify for them. And you will find that they are among the best resources you could possibly ask for to help you get even better results than you've achieved in the past. So thank you and welcome to the conference.